guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan, and today I'm going to be doing some early 2020 NHL Stanley Cup playoff predictions. That was a mouthful, but you get the gist. Now, Bob McKenzie has recently confirmed that the NHLPA has agreed on the 24-team playoff system. When I'm recording this, we don't know some of the exact details, but we know for the most part how this playoff is going to work and the 24 teams that will end up being involved. So, with this 24-team format, which teams do I see going far in this playoffs, and which team do I see ultimately win the Stanley Cup with the information we have now? Watch till the end for all my picks and predictions, and of course, hit that subscribe button for more videos just like this one. Now, there's still a pretty decent chunk of the playoffs that we really don't know about. For instance, how many games there's going to be in the qualifying rounds, the first round, and so on, when these playoffs are going to happen and how quick they're going to happen. But I wanted to make my early predictions based off what we know right now, based off of the opinions that I have as well. What we do know at this point, though, at the very least, is the qualifying rounds. For instance, in the West, you have Chicago versus Edmonton, Arizona versus Nashville, Minnesota versus Vancouver, and Winnipeg versus Calgary. In the East, Toronto faces off against Columbus, the Islanders against the Panthers, the Canes against the Rangers, and the Pittsburgh Penguins versus the Montreal Canadiens. Now, I'm going to start out by predicting the qualifying round playoff matchups, aka the matchups like Pittsburgh versus Montreal, and then after whoever Pittsburgh or Montreal would play, that was technically the first round of the playoffs. Just think of these matchups as kind of wild card series or games like in the MLB, I would say. Then you get into the actual playoffs in the first round, whoever they end up facing. But we're going to start out with the East prediction-wise with the Pittsburgh Penguins versus the Montreal Canadiens. And as much as the Pens, I would say, are scared to carry Price, I don't think it's going to matter too much in the end. I think the Penguins will win this series in 3. I think it will be a best-of-3 series throughout these qualifying rounds. Then the first round, technically, it will be 5. And then maybe in the second and third in the Stanley Cup Final, you have its best-of-7. But for right now, best-of-3 with these ones. I think the Penguins win it in 3. Then you go on to the Carolina Hurricanes versus the New York Rangers, and this was a series that I went back and forth on because, again, if we're factoring in everything here, these players and everybody is pretty much completely healthy, and for a team like New York Rangers, I think that'll help them quite a bit, and I think it'll be a close one in the end, and due to the stay at home with everything that we've had, I think there will be quite a bit of upsets in this playoffs, and specifically in these qualifying rounds, and I think in this matchup, the New York Rangers win it in 3. Sure, there is some bias on that end because I want to see Henrik Lundqvist win that Stanley Cup, but I think he will be the starter and he will try his hardest because, honestly, this might be his last chance. But continuing with the Eastern Conference qualifying round matchups, you go on now to the New York Islanders versus the Florida Panthers, and this was one that I'm pretty convinced the Islanders will win, even though I definitely want to see the Panthers get past this qualifying round and make it onto the first round. I think the Islanders would be pretty much one of the perfect teams to come out of this whole thing. They were on a bad losing streak to come in, and I think that's a team that with the system they have with Barry Trotz, I'm not going to doubt them too much, and for the Florida Panthers, I think they'll lose in that series in 2 games. Then you go on to the Toronto Maple Leafs versus the Columbus Blue Jackets, and this one I think definitely has upset potential, but I still think in the end, the Toronto Maple Leafs will win it in 3. I think Columbus is actually a pretty great matchup against Toronto for them. I think for Columbus, that's a team that they can actually do some damage against, but I still think Toronto wins it in the end. And then you go on to the Western Conference matchups in the qualifying round. Now getting into our first Western Conference matchup in the qualifying rounds, now going to Edmonton versus Chicago. And this is a series I could see going either way. I think Chicago has some upset potential with the stars they have and with the playoff experience they have, and also Corey Crawford potentially getting hot at any time. But I think the Edmonton Oilers are just going to will their way to the first round of these playoffs. McDavid is going to absolutely feast on that defense. Same thing with Leon Draisaitl. That defense got a lot more solid, and I think Mikko Koskinen can do some pretty great things for them. Then going on to the Nashville versus Arizona series, and this is a one that I was going back and forth on as well. I could see Arizona potentially upsetting if Darcy Kemper pretty much captured that Darcy Kemper of like October to December, but I still think the Preds do win this series, winning it in 3. I think they just have way more playoff experience, to be honest, also a better roster. Sorry, Arizona. Then going on to the last couple of playoff matchups in the qualifying round, you have Vancouver versus Minnesota. I think Vancouver wins this in 2. I really don't see how Minnesota is going to do anything in these playoffs, whether they face up against Vancouver or a different team. It's going to be Vancouver, and I think the Canucks are a great matchup against them. Markstrom, I think, is going to do great. Even though that defense is kind of worrisome, it's Minnesota, so it's not like they're going to score a bunch of goals here. Going on to the last Western Conference qualifying round matchup, though, between the Flames and the Jets. This is one that, again, could go either way. The Flames were a weird team. They had some great stretches of greatness and then some low lows. But I think the Winnipeg Jets are going to come out with a 2-game, technically, sweep out of this one. I think Connor Hellebuyck is going to capture something of his own. That forward group in Winnipeg is very solid. And I think the defense will wrap around the team. And I think that'll be a team that can do some damage. Might not get past the first round of these playoffs, but I think versus Calgary, that's a pretty good matchup for the Jets. Now, before we get into the matchups of this first round of the playoffs, we first need to talk about the playoff seeding for the top 4 teams in each conference. You have Boston, Philadelphia, Tampa, and Washington in the East. Then you have Vegas, Dallas, Colorado, and St. Louis in the West. And apparently, we don't know how many games it's going to be or whatever it would be, but apparently these teams are going to be fighting for the seeding in these playoffs. So a team like Boston could be 4th and end up facing a team like the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, I think if this were to happen, each team would play each other once, so about a total of 4 games, just so these teams can get a little bit of playoff action before the actual playoffs happen. So I think it'll be 1 game per each team. For the East, I think it'll shake out like this. The Bruins will be 1st, Flyers will be 2nd, Tampa will get the 3rd seed, and Washington will get the 4th seed. In the West, St. Louis will get the 1st, Colorado with the 2nd, Dallas with the 3rd seed, and Vegas with the 4th seed. So then we can get into the technical first round of these NHL playoffs, and the first matchup is the Boston Bruins versus the Toronto Maple Leafs, and it's not exactly a great time for any Leafs fan right now, because even though if the reseeding happens that way, I think Boston is a pretty likely team to still get the 1st seed, which means Toronto, even if they beat Columbus, will face the Bruins. I think in this series, the Bruins win in 5. Again, this first round being a best-of-5 series just to get the playoffs going. I think the Bruins win in that 5-game series and get over Toronto, because unless Toronto is going to pull something out of their hats, they don't usually win to the Boston Bruins, especially in those last games. Then going on to the Philadelphia Flyers versus the New York Islanders, and this is a really sneaky series because I could see the Islanders dominating, I could see the Flyers dominating, but in the end, I think the Flyers win this series in 4. Although the Islanders could shut them down quite a bit, I really like the Flyers' chances, and they're one of the more complete teams, I would say, heading into these playoffs. Then going on to easily one of the most interesting playoff matchups in this first round, you have the Tampa Bay Lightning versus the New York Rangers, and this thing would just be an absolute slogfest. So many great goals, so many great saves. I think it's going to be a fantastic series, and although I do like the Rangers heading into these playoffs, and they're a team that I think could get to the first round, I really don't see them winning against the Tampa Bay Lightning. I see the Lightning winning this series in 3, getting basically the sweep of the New York Rangers. I mean, I like that Rangers team, but let's be honest, that defense is going to be absolutely toasted versus the Lightning. Then going into the last series of the Eastern Conference, and you have the Pens versus the Washington Capitals, and there is some good matchups here, but this is one of the best. I think in this series, the Pens win in 5 games, but don't get me wrong, the Caps could easily win this series, and I would not be surprised. Then going on to the Western Conference matchups, and these are easily almost just as good. You have the first one being the St. Louis Blues versus the Winnipeg Jets, a matchup of, I think, the first round a couple of years back in 2018, but I think the Blues will win this series in 4. That's a team that I think is going to do as well as they did last year. Might not win the Stanley Cup, but I think is going to get pretty far. Then you have the Colorado Avalanche versus the Vancouver Canucks, the Quinn Hughes versus Cale Makar matchup, and although I like the Canucks' chances getting into the first round, I'm really not sure they get past the Avs. I think the Avs are going to have their way, the goaltending will step up, and that first line just will do wonders, as they always do. Then you go on to the Dallas Stars versus the Nashville Predators, and somehow facing off again in the first round. Though, even though I am a Stars fan, I am biased here. The Stars always have the Preds numbers, so I'm still going to pick them to win this one, and I think they'll sweep the Preds in 3 games. I know, I am biased, but Please, I need to be sometimes. Then going on to the Vegas Golden Knights versus the Edmonton Oilers, and this might sneakily be maybe the best series out of these Western Conference matchups, because you got two teams that aren't exactly favorites, but are a lot of fun to watch. In this one though, although I love me the Golden Knights, they're my third favorite team, I think the Oilers are actually going to pull this thing off. I think they'll win it in 5 games. It's going to be super close, but I think the goaltending, the defense is going to step up big, and Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl having the spotlight in Vegas potentially as a hub city, I think they'll do pretty well, and we'll get on to the second round. Now going on to the second round of these NHL playoffs, and starting out in the Eastern Conference, we have the Boston Bruins versus the Philadelphia Flyers, and this would just be an insane series back and forth. And as I said before, I think with this total break, there's going to be teams that are either totally prepared or totally not. And I think there are some teams here that will have an advantage. You look at the Philadelphia Flyers, I mean, you could have JVR coming back as soon as these playoffs start. And I think it'll be a close series, but in my opinion, there will be an upset. And I think the Philadelphia Flyers will win this one in 6. As the second round goes on, it'll be 7-game matchups, round 1 being 5. This will be the first series with 7 games. And although the Bruins have a good situation with that, although not in the Stanley Cup Final, I think the Flyers will get it done in 6. Then you go on to the Tampa Bay Lightning versus the Pittsburgh Penguins, and honestly, this is one that could go either way. I think it will go the distance, going 7 games, but I think the Lightning will get it. I just don't see the Pittsburgh defense being as strong as it needs to be, and the goaltending, I'm just not sure about. Maybe Vasilevsky on Tampa can rise to the occasion. I think that might happen, but Tampa's just an overall sound team that, even though Pittsburgh has a strong advantage, I'm not sure we'll get past round 2. Then on to the Western Conference with St. Louis versus the Colorado Avalanche, and this would be an insane matchup. I think just like Tampa-Pittsburgh will go all the way to 7 games, but I think St. Louis's playoff resume and playoff experience will get the best of the Avs once again. I think it'll be a fantastic series, solid goaltending, solid defense, solid offense all around, but I just don't see the Avs having enough to get past the Blues. Then you go on to the second Western Conference matchup between my Dallas Stars and the Edmonton Oilers, and I will not underestimate the Oilers. I think this will be a very fun, very energetic series as well, with lots of hitting, lots of saves, but I think the Stars will win this series in 5. Although I like the Oilers' chances to get a game or 2, I'm really not sure how that depth really factors in. Dallas is one of the most strong and consistent defensive teams, meanwhile having one of the best goaltenders in the league in Ben Bishop, and although Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl are gods, I'm not sure they'll be able to keep up with that, in my opinion. Then we go on to the Eastern Conference Final and the Western Conference Final, and starting out in the East, we have the Philadelphia Flyers versus the Tampa Bay Lightning. And if you thought some of those other matchups in round 2 were high, intense, high-octane series, this would be absolutely insane. You have so much scoring, so many saves, so much craziness. I think it's going to go up and down. And even though the Tampa Bay Lightning are my second favorite team, I still do like the Flyers' chances of upsetting. If they can upset the Boston Bruins, I think they can upset anybody. And in this clean slate with everybody healthy, I think Philadelphia is a team that can do very well. They were so good going into these kind of break, and I think with the playoffs, that's a team that will do well. Although I like the Tampa Bay Lightning's chances, and I hope they win this series, I do have another upset, and I think the Flyers will win this series in 7. It'll be a very, very close one, but I think they will win it. Then going on to the Western Conference Final of the St. Louis Blues versus the Dallas Stars. And although I had my second favorite team losing against the Flyers, I will also have my first favorite team, the Dallas Stars, losing in this one. I think the Blues are going to win this one in 7 games because it always seems to happen. Every single time we go to 7 games and then we lose. And until we actually beat the Blues in Game 7, I'm not sure it's going to happen. Now getting into the Stanley Cup Final with my predictions of the Philadelphia Flyers in the East and the St. Louis Blues in the West. And this would be a fantastic series for Philly. They haven't won the Cup in decades. St. Louis just got their first Cup last year. So it would be a great matchup in my opinion. And even though the Blues are one of my least favorite teams as a Stars fan, I think you can figure that, I really do like the Philadelphia Flyers' chances. In the end though, I think it's going to be a 7-game series, an absolute battle to the very end. And as I said before, I think this is a playoffs that will be filled with upsets, filled with surprises. And I think in the end, you might call me crazy, go ahead, I predict the Philadelphia Flyers to win the 2020 Stanley Cup. With all this craziness that's happened, the Flyers winning the Cup, is just about that crazy. And with the Blues having the cup last year, their first one ever, I think the Flyers are a team that can do the same, can really do well in these playoffs, and if healthy, they have pretty much everything. A very elite offensive core, especially in the playoffs, has a lot of playoff experience, a defense that was super strong, led by Ivan Provorov, and a young Carter Hart, just like Jordan Binnington was last season. But that's it for my 2020 NHL playoff predictions. Of course, with this one, let me know down in the comments what you agree and disagree with, and who do you see winning the 2020 Stanley Cup. Of course, with this video, also make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell if you haven't already. Share this video with your friends, any hockey fan you know, and especially Flyers fans. They just might like this video. And click on this card for all my predictions videos right in one playlist. My name is Nathan, and I'll see you guys next video or stream. Goodbye.